What is going on YouTube? Old Shaman here, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different for the channel, and I'm actually going to be talking to you guys about probably one of my favorite consoles of all time, and that is the Sega Saturn. Now, for those of you who do not know, the Sega Saturn was a fifth console generation system that was released by Sega in early, or I should say rather, late 1995. It was a 32-bit system, and it was competing with basically the Nintendo 64 and the soon-to-be Sony PlayStation. But the reason I'm here today to show you guys the Sega Saturn, because I'm not trying to give you guys a history lesson, I'm basically going to show you my collection of rare games that I own for the Sega Saturn. Now, I know that a lot of people tend to avoid collecting for the Sega Saturn because most of the games are very rare and hard to find and can be very, very expensive for those who are trying to actually collect for the system. So I'm just going to give basically a rundown of some of the rare games that I own personally for the system and how much, usually you can probably find a complete in-box copy for. Like I said, the Sega Saturn is a very expensive console to collect for and is no way a cheap system to collect for. So I'm going to give you guys some tips as well as show you guys a few of the games that I own that are somewhat rare in my collection. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So first off, I kind of wanted to talk about the console itself and what it sort of features. So as you can see here, this is the North American Model 2 Sega Saturn. The only difference between the Model 1 and the Model 2 is the buttons as well as the LEDs. The original Sega Saturn, which is the Model 1, had a plastic piece that was right here, and you could see a audio and as well as a disc-in LED. Instead, the typical power just simply turns green whenever you turn it on. And then the buttons are circular instead of oval shape, which is one of the differences. As well as also there is a cartridge slot on the top, which is where you can put in any of your backup memory. So if you have any memory cards or cartridges that you want to put in, then you can also use those. The thing with the Sega Saturn is that it also has its own built-in memory, which means that you could save games directly to your console via battery. I would take that apart and show you guys where exactly you put the battery, but if you see that little cartridge slot right here, that is basically where you put the battery, if you open that up. Anyways, so this right here is my original Sega Saturn. I bought this back in, I want to say 2004. I actually acquired this through a garage sale. I didn't really know much about the system when I was growing up as a kid. As a matter of fact, when I acquired the system, I didn't even know it existed. When I was telling my friends about it, they were like, "What? A Sega system? There's no way that thing can exist, right?" And truth be told, it did exist. So anyways, let's go ahead and get right into the video games, shall we? Went ahead and moved the system out of the way so we could get right into it. And so starting off, we have is not necessarily a rare game, but an uncommon game, and that is Dark Savior. Now this was a Sega Saturn exclusive, and it's a very interesting game. It's like a 3D dungeon crawler and platformer. Basically, it's really hard to explain this game because it has a lot of interesting things thrown together in one. It's basically you level up your character, you battle enemies, and then you also have it's like an action RPG with platforming elements, if that makes any sense. This was a Saturn exclusive, which means that the only way you're going to be able to play this game is if you own a Sega Saturn. And it's an interesting game. It's definitely not a bad game, and it's sort of getting uncommon, which means that the price is starting to go up. You could probably pay about $20 to $30 for a complete in-box copy. I only paid $10 for mine, though. Next is Panzer Dragoon. This is the long box edition. Now, Sega actually released two versions of this game. They released a console bundle, which came in the small little jewel case, and then also a long box edition, which the long box edition is starting to get rare and valuable in price. A complete in-box copy with the manual and the disc can easily run anywhere from probably $30 to $40. I paid about $15 for mine. I started collecting Sega Saturn games relatively when they weren't as expensive, but they have just shot up in price. Panzer Dragoon is actually a really fun game. It's basically a on-rail shooter, sort of like Star Fox. So if you've played Star Fox on the Super Nintendo and N64, it's like that, but you're riding a dragon instead, which I think is freaking amazing. If you want to find a cheaper and sort of HD version of Panzer Dragoon, play Panzer Dragoon Orta on the original Xbox. That's a really fun game. Next on our list, and this game has really shot up in value, is Resident Evil on the Sega Saturn. Now this has been going for a lot complete in box, and usually with the Sega Saturn games is with the complete in box copies, they come with this little disc protector so that way it doesn't fall out, and then of course the manual. One thing I like about Sega Saturn and their long boxes is that they do feature a lot of stuff on it in terms of like the back cover and everything like that. Personally, this is the definitive version of the original classic Resident Evil before they did the HD remake. If you guys actually want a true to the original, if you guys don't want to play the director's cut on PlayStation, I don't blame you. Personally, Resident Evil on Sega Saturn is the definitive version. I like it better than the PlayStation. It runs a lot smoother, and some of the polygons actually look nicer on this system. And not only that, but it includes a Monster Rush mode, which is basically Resident Evil, but it's on a time limit, and I would have to say it's probably one of the coolest features in Resident Evil. If you guys are a hardcore Resident Evil fan, buy a Sega Saturn and play this version. Although this version goes anywhere from around $70 to $100 on average if you want a complete in-box copy on eBay or from a reseller, which typically will sell the game for a pretty expensive price. Next on our list is Shining the Holy Ark. This is one of the Shining Force games, or rather I should say one of the Shining games in the Shining Force series. Shining in the Holy Ark is sort of a weird version of a dungeon crawler. I haven't really had too much of a chance to play this one, just because I haven't really found the time to play it, but from what I did play of it, it's an okay game. It's not bad or by any means. It's just, it's probably not for me. I'm not a huge fan of dungeon crawlers, but the game looks nice. It definitely is an interesting game, and this game has shot up tremendously. I remember back when this game was like $40 or $50, but this game can go anywhere from like basically $150 to $165 on eBay on average, and complete in box, but you could probably pick up a disc version of this game for about $20 to $40 depending on the condition of the disc. Again, it's an interesting game, and I would have to say it's probably one of the few games on the Sega Saturn that is an RPG. There were a lot of RPGs that came out for the Sega Saturn, but a lot of them were only Japan exclusive, which means that we didn't really see too much outside of Japan, and that was unfortunate. But anyways, Shining in the Holy Ark, pretty cool game from what I've seen. I haven't played through it too much. Nights into Dreams. This is basically one of the reasons to own a Sega Saturn right here. This is not really a rare game. I just wanted to feature it in this episode just because, if you want a Sega Saturn, you have to own this game. This is honestly one of the most beautiful games, and I normally don't describe games as beautiful because, usually games are associated a lot with sort of like this action kind of element, and you're not really looking at the art aesthetic of the game. But when you see, usually I'm not the type of person to admit that I like seeing pretty colors in video games. But let me tell you, this game sort of is creative in its own way. It has a very unique art style, and it's the only game on record that Shigeru Miyamoto has stated that he wishes he created. This is one of the legendary games that Sonic Team released, and by far one of the best games that I've seen on the Sega Saturn. The game just looks absolutely beautiful with the 32-bit graphics, and honestly, this is probably one of the best games made by Sonic Team for sure. And even though the system didn't get its own definitive Sonic title, this game sort of replaces that because it's just that great, and definitely worth picking up. The long box edition goes anywhere from around $20 to $30 on eBay, but if you really want to pick up a cheap copy of this game, which you can relatively cheap because this was not the bundled game. Originally when the Sega Saturn came out, it was bundled with Daytona USA, But as it got later in its lifespan, they bundled it with Nights into Dreams, and it just came in the traditional jewel case, which is fairly common. You can find those relatively cheap online for about $5 to $10. So if you want to snag a copy of this, you can do it relatively easily. Just one of the best games on the system, hands down. Definitely in the top 10 for sure. Alrighty, and now these are some of the more expensive games that I own. These three games are just ridiculously, expensive and hard to find. Dragon Force being the weakest of the three. The reason I included this was because the seller that I bought it from actually included the RAM cart, which came with, I believe, the pre-ordered version of the game. I could be wrong about that. I'm not really sure how you went about acquiring this cartridge. But it's an official cartridge by Sega. It was included, I guess, with Dragon Force if you bought it. I'm not entirely sure. There's not a whole lot of history on this. But anyways, I got the cart. Now, the game itself is beat up to no end. The jewel case is scratched, and the top hinge is broken off. I paid a cheap price for this game, so I'm not going to really complain about it. I actually bought this about 2-3 years ago, and I only paid about $50 for both the cart and the game itself. This is a very interesting game. It's a Working Designs game, and it's a turn-based RPG, but it has basically RTS features in the game. It's one of the weirdest games ever. It's like if you combine Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics, and then also included RTS elements into those tactical RPG elements, and they just had like one weird baby together, and you basically get Dragon Force. Now, the name itself is not a innuendo to the band. I hope you guys know that. And it's just a strange game, but it's a fun game to play. It's one of the longest and hardest games on the Sega Saturn, and the reason why it was bundled with the RAM cart in the first place is just because this game is extremely big in memory. I mean, this game takes up, let's see here, it says on the back, 284 blocks of memory. That is just ridiculous. I mean, the actual internal battery on the Sega Saturn only holds around 50 to 80, if I'm not mistaken. And because this game is over 284, you need to have backup memory for this game in order to play it and save and then continue it. There are multiple stories, there are multiple characters to select, and there are also multiple endings that you can get to this game, and it's just absolutely ridiculous how crazy this game is. Anyways, I've talked long enough about Dragon Force. It's a good game, but if you guys can't find it, it's completely understandable. It's a Working Design game, and usually the stuff that they make are absolutely great and fantastic, just really rare and hard to find. The next game on my list is yet another Sonic Team game, and why have they not remade this game? I have no idea. This is Burning Rangers. It's a futuristic firefighter game, with basically you're a futuristic firefighter, and you sort of have these jetpacks which allow you to you don't really use water in this game. You use like lasers to put out fires. It's super weird. Anyways, this is a Sonic Team game, and this is probably the best looking 3D game on the Sega Saturn. This was sort of released in that weird time period where polygons weren't exactly clear. If you guys remember Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation, that game for the time looked amazing, but you take a look back at it now and you're like, well, geez, what the hell were people talking about? This game looks like shit. Again, it's sort of like this game. Like, if you played this game back in 1998, this game was actually really mind-blowing to see the graphics that it was able to pull off. But anyways, the reason as to why this game is super, super rare is it was released in the last year of the Sega Saturn, and that was in 1998 before it was eventually cut from store shelves, and they only made about 20,000 copies of this game. Now, I found my copy for $100 on eBay, and that was about 2 or 3 years ago, and now it goes easily for well over $300. This game is not an easy game to find. It is super rare. I would definitely recommend that you guys try to find a good price on eBay, because the chances of you finding this game out in the wild are slim to none. Like I said, there was about 20,000 copies of this game ever made and produced here in the United States. So good luck finding this game. Honestly, I can barely find it, let alone find a complete in-box copy. The Japan version, if you guys want to port that over and play it on the Sega Saturn, you can find that relatively cheap. You can probably find it for about 30 to 40 bucks, which is super cheap. So anyways, that is Burning Rangers. Again, one of my rare games that I own in my collection, hands down. Alrighty, we have come to the final game, and just before anyone, bullshits in the comments, like, oh, you don't own Panzer Dragoon Saga? Yeah, no. I never was able to find a Panzer Dragoon Saga copy for a really cheap price. I was going to buy one a couple of years ago, and I would have been able to buy one for about $350, but I thought I was going to get a better deal, and so I didn't do it. I didn't buy it, and so I was a little disappointed in that fact that I did not acquire basically the one game that would have made my Sega Saturn collection look like gold. And it's unfortunate, but maybe one day I'll be able to buy a copy. Who knows? But right now, if you guys want to get a Panzer Dragoon Saga copy complete, you're talking about $600. And I just don't have the kind of fun to be dropping $600 on a complete in-box game. That's just ridiculous. Anyways, the final game, and personally, what I think to be one of the rarest games that I own in my Sega Saturn collection is Mega Man X4. Now, you might be thinking, well, Mega Man X4, that is a completely easy game to get on the PlayStation and completely easy game to get on the X Collection on GameCube and PS2 and Xbox. This game is super easy to get. Well, that is true in those cases, but the Sega Saturn version is actually the hardest copy to get. As a matter of fact, if you want a complete in-box copy of Mega Man X4, and that means the disc, the insert, the manual, we're talking easily about $250 to $265. Now, not only is it hard to find itself, and the fact of the matter is, just because of the price doesn't mean that it's super, super rare. The game is rare in itself, even without the price. If you find a complete in-box copy with the manual and everything, we're talking loads and loads of just rarity. You barely find this game on eBay in itself, and if you do find it on eBay, it's usually in sections. You either find the manual with the disc, or you don't find the back label, or something's wrong with the game disc itself, or the disc case is cracked. This is a very hard game to find. I rarely see these games go anywhere for under $200 on average, and if you want a complete in-box copy in mint condition, super, super hard to find game. Anyways, X4 is my rarest game that I own. So that's basically all the games that I own in my Sega Saturn collection that I consider to be rare. I own a lot more games, but they're not really that hard to find. Like, if we're talking like Clockwork Knight or Bug or, let's see, what are some of the Daytona, USA, Virtua Fighter, Fighting Vipers, stuff like that, and then all the sports titles, all those are relatively easy to find, and they're not very hard to collect for. In fact, all the sport games for the Sega Saturn are super cheap and really easy to collect for. So anyways, that was my Sega Saturn collection. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing this. I don't know if I'm going to continue to do these sort of gaming segments, because I have a lot of other games that I'd like to show off, but I really wanted to shed some light on the Sega Saturn, as it has a lot of really cool games for it, and it was definitely something part of my childhood. Even though I didn't grow up with the system around the time when it was released in 1995, I still found love for it even so late in the early 2000s that I really wanted to talk about it. So thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Definitely check out some of my other videos on my channel. I have more than just gaming stuff. I do mostly anime and manga stuff. So definitely check those out. Anyways, have an awesome day. Peace out. Thank you guys for watching.